following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. Could the Hullo Ferry transform Nanaimo into the public transit hub of Vancouver Island? Urban planner and self-described transit nerd Denis Agar thinks so. He worked at TransLink for a decade before leaving to become executive director of a nonprofit transit advocacy group called Movement. The Hullo is run by the Vancouver Island Ferry Company. It's been sailing for over a year as of mid-August, offering passenger-only trips between the cruise ship terminal in Nanaimo and Canada Place in Vancouver. It's the final long weekend of the summer, and the BC government issued a release advising drivers to plan ahead with heavy traffic and congestion expected on BC's most popular routes. Agar says fundamentally, his hub proposal would mean people could get around Vancouver Island without a car.
My name is Denis Agar. I'm the executive director of Movement, Metro Vancouver Transit Riders, but also generally just a big transit nerd that's passionate about our province's network. Not just Vancouver.
And you're talking to me today from the other side of the Salish Sea, and you see the Hullo Ferry in Nanaimo as key to getting intercity transit into a better place on Vancouver Island. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a passenger ferry, right? It starts to shift that paradigm away from car ferries, which I think we've been really fixated on in this province for a few decades. So a passenger ferry going right into downtown Vancouver's network, it connects to, multiple rapid transit lines. And then on the Nanaimo side, what we could see is a hub, right? That the ferry connects to a bus terminal with buses that take you up to Campbell River and Tofino and Victoria and eventually maybe trains. But if you just count out how long it takes for those buses to travel across the island and from that ferry to travel from Vancouver, you can even offer people the fastest connection between Vancouver and Victoria via Nanaimo. So that's a huge potential market that will feed lots of passengers through this hub and make it viable, because that's ultimately what transit needs to be viable is people, scale, volume. So that's my big pitch is make a hub in Nanaimo, get a lot of people to travel through Nanaimo to Victoria, and you'll be able to sustain buses all across the island, not just to Victoria.
Who do you think should run these buses in a hypothetical future?
I'm not too fussed with that. I mean, I think that it will need to be subsidized. So someone's going to figure out how to subsidize it. There are a few different models. But I do look at the Saskatchewan model as being really beneficial. So the province had its own intercity bus agency that covered all of Saskatchewan to like little small towns far in the north. And what that allowed them to do is, first of all, make trips to remote rural places affordable. They would have subsidized passes if you're going into the city for a medical appointment. They would have affordable freight. You could put packages in the bottom of the bus. So that supports small businesses in rural towns. And there was a conservative government in Saskatchewan that shut down that whole network, I think in 2018 or 2019. And it was costing them something like $17 million a year, which is almost nothing in the scale of a provincial budget. And in BC, we can expect far more tourist traffic to hopefully pay for the subsidy that we're offering British Columbians as they reach, to Campbell River and Port Hardy and places like that.
So we already have obviously a number of BC ferry routes between the mainland and the island. That's the governance structure is kind of complicated, but more or less a publicly owned company. How do you think Hullo Ferries in this scenario being a private company changes the situation? Or what do we need to think about if we're talking about building a whole hub for an island around it?
I mean, that's an excellent question. There are examples around the world as well of private services being integrated into public structures. So one thing we could have is like a central provincial like booking portal that integrates Hullo tickets with bus tickets. But at the end of the day, it will involve some form of subsidy, I think, right? Like that'll be needed to make the costs affordable. And that's what we expect from every mode of transportation, right? Like driving, you may not feel when you're driving down Highway 1 that it's subsidized, but actually the province pays, hundreds of millions of dollars to keep that thing running. And so, yeah, I'm not quite sure how the specifics would work out, but ultimately we will need government intervention.
And if a part of your pitch is that this could be the most efficient way to use public transit to get people from Vancouver to Victoria, that suggests that a ferry between those two places, downtown to downtown, wouldn't work. Is that a fair insinuation? Yeah,
I mean, it hasn't worked. The V2V ferry existed for a few years. I was very fortunate to be able to take it. And it ran from downtown Vancouver to downtown Victoria. It was very expensive, like starting at $110 because of how much land it has to traverse. Victoria Harbor is oriented totally away from the mainland. So you have to do some pretty annoying circuitous stuff. So it's going to be more expensive, more fuel burnt, and it's going to just take a long time, right? Like at least 3.5 hours. And so I guess what is the advantage, right? And V2V's perspective, the way that they marketed it when they were operating is that it would be a tourist service. It would be kind of like, ooh, this is nice. You can just take a one-seat ride from Vancouver to Victoria and look at all the scenery on the way. Oh, look at the nice Gulf Islands. And that wasn't enough to keep them afloat. They actually went bust before COVID started. So I think that's a reflection of the challenges ahead for someone to take on a direct downtown Vancouver to downtown Victoria ferry. Now, like anything's possible. I'm not out here saying like they're guaranteed to fail. You can, take it from me. But I just think what an opportunity that the idea that Nanaimo is the closest city on the island of Vancouver, an opportunity to build a hub that, even European nations would be envious of, right? That every ferry was met with, not only a bus to Victoria, because again, these ferries can carry almost 400 people. Each bus, a big comfortable coach bus would carry 40, 50 people. So you meet it with not only a bus to Victoria and Tofino and Campbell River and Port Hardy, but you could meet it with a bus that goes directly to UVic. And you could eventually build the case to bring back the Island Railway, which hopefully, you'd have to invest in it enough for it to move faster than the bus, which would be a big lift, but you'll have all those passengers coming through Nanaimo that it'll become a no-brainer.
Also, maybe an undercurrent to our conversation right now is the current intercity options to travel around Vancouver Island. What do you make of those? What would you have to say about people's options right now?
Well, as I mentioned before, almost every mode of transportation requires subsidy, right? And the people that are running the buses across Vancouver Island don't have access to any of those subsidies. I don't know why. I don't know why we think we can do this. But what results is a service that's undersized, not very attractive, and way too expensive. And I don't begrudge the operators of the private bus companies this at all. But it's just different when you look at a similar region with publicly operated bus service, or at least publicly subsidized bus service, that they would, it would be at least hourly service between Nanaimo and Victoria, right? Two cities of that size, that close to each other, whose economies are tied that closely. We would at least have hourly service, and it wouldn't cost. Right now, they're the little buses. I think they only carry something like 16 people. And the ticket is $40. I used to travel a trip of that duration between, Guelph and Toronto, and it was 10. It's just not. And that's not unique to the island as well. There's lots of parts of Canada where we expect rural and intercity transit to happen with no government intervention. And the result is like, I think it costs like $300 to take the bus up north in BC towards like Fort St. John and Prince George and that kind of thing. And there's so many models. Like I mentioned Saskatchewan. But I could also mention Washington State, Portland, Virginia. Ontario's GO transit network continues to grow out into the countryside. There are so many examples of places, like places to the left of us, places to the right of us. It doesn't matter. There are so many places that the government just spends a tiny bit of their budget to totally revolutionize transit to small cities and towns across their region.
What would your response to a kind of sentiment of that could cost too much be?
I mean, I would say, I grew up in a small town. I live in Vancouver now. So if, someone that doesn't own a car in Vancouver, they have the luxury of being able to just hop on the bus or the train wherever they need to go. For the most part, it works out. When you can't drive in a small town, you don't have that luxury. And I would submit to you that, yeah, maybe you don't need transit, but I guarantee you there are so many people in your town that do. Seniors that either lost their license or can't afford to drive anymore, youth that maybe can't afford their own car or aren't old enough to have their license. That's already like what, 30, 40% of the population. And then you bring in kind of like rural poverty and the idea that it is hard to make a living in some like towns that have lost their mill or whatever it might be. There are a lot of people in your town that really need transit. And if you don't know them, I guarantee you they're there.
Now, on the Vancouver side, the Hullo Ferry docks right at the cruise ship terminal, right at you feel like you're in the city right away. On the Nanaimo side, it's actually, because of some particular fences and what have you, Google Maps would suggest that it's a 24-minute walk just to get to the Port Place shopping center, which is kind of the heart of downtown. I don't know, what do you think of the idea that Vancouver Island's transit hub would be in a place that's kind of inaccessible to the people living in the hub city and would be designed more for people traveling to other places, specifically the mainland? That's
an excellent question. My understanding of why Hullo's ferry terminal is where it is, that's where the Port Authority's ferry or cruise ship terminal was that Hullo can use as their terminal, and that there's a whole lot of parking to get people to the Hullo. Now, you might have seen in the news that there was a cruise ship docked in Nanaimo for a day or two, and that forced the Hullo to actually move right downtown, right beside the Gabriola ferry. And so that shows to me that it's possible, and that if Hullo and their business model wasn't so reliant on people driving to the ferry, then they could actually, if we can promise them that lots of people will get on the ferry, they don't care if the person drives or takes the bus there. And so having a terminal just moved a few meters north, on the other side of the car, import terminal, would I think be really excellent for Nanaimans, Islanders. It would be great for Islanders, and it would be also, I think, a huge boon for downtown Nanaimo, which has so much potential to be this kind of one of it's already one of the greatest cities in British Columbia, but the idea that it would be at the crossroads of Vancouver and Victoria would mean that so many more people would want to locate their businesses and their schools and their activities there. And one thing I'll point out too is that a lot of this, like me talking about a Nanaimo hub, I've been kind of ranting about it for a while. I did my master's back in 2016, and I did my capstone project about it, and I fleshed this whole idea out. And one of the things that I talked about it too is that, like a lot of this is impingent on, in the summer, tourists coming, exploring the island, not having to rent a car every single time they explore the island, so they're not clogging up the highways. And what you could do, if you wanted, is for that hub to be a one-stop shop for those tourists. Like, a lot of them might be coming all the way from Europe or Asia, and they might not have a tent, but they want to go camping. And so the idea is they could take the ferry over, go to the hub and get everything they need, get food, get camping supplies, get rent a bike, whatever it might be. And it's kind of like the place you start your island vacation.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Support Midcoast Morning and CHLY's nonprofit newsroom today by becoming a sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. Local news can't survive without your support. Another way to help us out is to share this show with your friends and tell them why they should support us. Finally, if you're listening to the podcast edition of Midcoast Morning, go and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast feed you use. It helps people find us.
The Hullo Ferry, run by Vancouver Island Ferry Company, has been operating for more than a year as of mid-August. It offers passenger-only trips from the cruise ship terminal in Nanaimo to Canada Place in Vancouver. Urban planner and transit advocate Denis Agar says the ferry service can transform Nanaimo into the public transit hub of Vancouver Island. I'm digging into that idea with him on today's program. What do you think people could do if they think this is something they want to see happen? What action could they take?
Well, I mean, I definitely think you should reach out to people. Like, I run a nonprofit that's fighting for better transit. I'm doing that because I came to understand that politicians hear way more from people that are opposed to transit than people that support it. And so we need to just talk to them more. Just be in the politicians' ears. You see them at a party, you talk to them. You call them, you email them, ask for a meeting, that kind of thing. So I think that's worth doing on this file, especially with the MLAs that are up island have a huge incentive to support this. And if we could get them to kind of convince the greater, whichever party's in power in a few months, I think either one will have a lot of interest in capturing and really holding those swing seats. And I think there are a lot of those, not just up island, but like all across BC. Basically anywhere in BC that's not Victoria and Vancouver are places that are like criminally underserved by transit. And I mean, Vancouver and Victoria could do with a lot more transit too. Anyway, all of that to say, ask for a meeting with your MLA, say that you want great public transit, and there's a way to make it viable by routing people through this Nanaimo hub. And it has all these economic spillover benefits to Vancouver Islanders. If you're talking to someone that cares about the economy, and if you're talking to someone that cares about social justice, you can talk about how it just unlocks mobility and, keeps people from being housebound and creates more social links. The benefits of transit are so, like, you can talk about the health benefits. People can access healthcare. It's just kind of the social policy that does so much.
There were two ideas you mentioned there that I want to pick back up on. First, you said that politicians hear way more from people who oppose transit than who support it. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I used to work at TransLink, which is the transit agency for Metro Vancouver. I was there for 10 years. And towards the end of that time, my job was to try and get bus lanes, right? To make buses faster, more reliable, reduce our carbon emissions, make it a more viable way for people to get around. And the streets that the bus lanes will go on are controlled not by TransLink, but by cities like Vancouver, Burnaby, et cetera. And it was really remarkable to me how hard those conversations were. TransLink was coming with money, right? Like, we'll give you everything. We'll cover the whole cost of the bus lane. You just need to allow us to do it. And there was so much fear amongst civic leaders that if they put in bus lanes, they would get complaints from people who are either losing potentially parking or, losing a lane of traffic. And there was not that same fear about, oh man, the transit riders are mad at me. The 49 keeps getting stuck around Main Street. Like, I'm never going to hear the end of it. Like, that's what I think needs to change, is that that politicians are they can only act on the information that they have. And there are so many transit users across this province that have really bad experiences, like mind-blowingly bad, undignified, stuck in the rain, no lighting, unsafe, like all this. But politicians, like I asked a city councilor, what did you hear about transit when you campaigned in 2022? And she paused and she was just kind of like, not a lot, right? And yet in Metro Vancouver, we have 1 million people that ride transit at least once a week, 40% of the region. So anyway, so my job currently is to try and mobilize those 40% to materially change our conditions, to make things better. And I think that's not to also neglect the people that don't ride transit currently, but wish they had access to it. So that's on top of the 40%. That's a good chunk more. And then there are the people who probably may never ride transit, but totally understand why it's necessary and why we can't keep pumping more cars onto Highway 1. Like it's just a not a long-term strategy. So there are a lot of people like that too. I've been meeting lots and lots of supporters out there, which makes it all the more painful that when politicians in their imagination think about investing in transit, they think about not the supporters, but the opponents. And they also think about, people that generally oppose government spending, which is also pretty silly because the point I always try and make is that government spending on transit can yield so many benefits that it will end up saving the government money, right? Like we're spending $2.5 billion on 8 kilometers of freeway widening, not even 8 kilometers of freeway, but just 8 kilometers of adding 2 lanes on either side, 1 bus lane, 1 HOV lane in Abbotsford. And that's getting pretty close to the cost per kilometer of even the most of the Langley SkyTrain, which the cost overruns, I think, have increased the total cost of that by 50%. But we're looking at a pretty similar cost per kilometer, and you're getting a whole SkyTrain versus just a couple more lanes on a highway that'll be full in no time.
The other thing I wanted to touch on, you kind of mentioned it a little bit, is we're about to be in a provincial election campaign. How does that campaign change things in terms of bringing an issue like transit to the forefront? How can people, if they're interested in that, make a difference? And is it different than a normal non-campaign time?
Oh, it's totally different. Yeah, you do have the opportunity to get into politicians' ears. Like they're trying to win your support. They're trying to be friends with you. And so you can set the terms of that friendship if you want. There are some great people on the island that are working on issues like this. I know that there's a group called Better Island Transit, and they're really focused on finally getting reliable, maybe hourly transit service to Duncan. And this would, I think, fit really. This is kind of a bigger, an evolution of that. But I would encourage you to connect with those people, to just Google that and work with them. But like I say, I really do think it's worth reaching out to your MLA. Say, like, I live in your constituency. I want to talk to you about this.
Is there anything else you think it's important to bring to this conversation today?
I guess one thing, it is a privilege to travel internationally. And the people that I have met who've been able to do that always come home and they're like, why is transit the way it is here at home? They're like, I had such an amazing time traveling around, insert country here. It almost doesn't matter. There are so many places in the world that have a transit system that is designed as though they want people to take it. Right? That it's seamless, that it's clear, it's frequent. You don't have to think too hard. And then people get home and then they look at, like, okay, how do I even get from Victoria to Nanaimo? There's not even really a clear way to find out. I guess I'll just Google it. That's a big part of our transit network now, is just Googling things and finding, there's a small bus that does it for $40. So I would encourage people to really lean into that feeling that if you do go on an international vacation and you come home and you're just like, why is it like this here? Follow that line of thinking, because there is no good reason. We are not less well off than the country you visited. You know what I mean? Like, we're one of the most prosperous countries in the world. We are not more conservative than that country. I think we are clearly willing to spend public money on things that matter to us. And we are not more rural than that country, unless the country you visited is Singapore. Like, we have lots of space in Canada and lots of distances to cover to reach maybe 5% of the population. And chances are you are one of the 95% that are very, very close to a highway that could have relatively good bus service or potentially a railway. Chances are, if you're listening to this, you are, you could benefit from transit. So there are a lot of excuses that people make for why Canada is so bad as it is. I would even draw people's attention to the United States. They have federal grants for rural transit. So if you look at a place like Cowichan Valley in the US, it would have way more transit than we have here. And it's not, again, it's not because they're more progressive. It's not because, there's more people, that the places like that are denser. It's like a, like for like comparison. And they have more transit in the US. So whatever reason you might have to think, oh, we can't do this here, this won't work here, just take a look around the world, and when you're ready to fight for it, let's fight for it.
Denis, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me about it.
Pleasure.
Denis Agar is Executive Director of the nonprofit transit advocacy group, Movement. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and RB Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe for updates from our nonprofit newsroom and more. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, email us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
Midcoast Morning would not be possible without the funding of the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Midcoast Morning is a project of CHLY's nonprofit newsroom. Support nonprofit journalism in Nanaimo and on the Salish Sea today by becoming a monthly sustaining donor at $5 or more per month. Support the program at chly.ca/donate. If you're already a supporter, record a voice memo telling others where you're listening from and why they too should support our work. After you're done, you can email it to us. Also, share the podcast with your friends. While Meta is blocking Canadian users from sharing news content on their Facebook feeds, you can still share our podcast directly with your friends via Facebook or Instagram Messenger. Finally, this program acknowledges and gives thanks to the Nanaimo First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.